Hey guys, well, we're live in the newsroom here at Fox 5 DC. Welcome to the stream on this Thursday, July 19th. Thanks for joining us. Today we're going to be just kind of tracking around the local and far as well news, live breaking news from all over the country and the world, really. Whatever video we have coming in, we'll bring to you to make sure you're on top of today's news. Hope you're having a good Thursday already. This is our newsroom behind me here, kind of bustling in the background. We had a little bit of breaking news this morning that has since been sort of dissolved. So we're going to go over to whatever we're looking forward to today, which includes Vice President Pence will be in St. Louis. He'll be speaking at a America's First tax type of rally today. We have some other top stories for you in package form to kind of keep you up to date with what's been happening and what our sister stations across the country are covering. Right now, as far as live events go, check this out. Some aerial footage of a bank in Fort Worth, Texas. This is the scene of some sort of bank robbery that we've been tracking here. Again, this is in Fort Worth, Texas, and it seems to be a small bank. Still trying to find out the name of this for you guys, but you can see the aerials are doing a good job of kind of getting in the scene. Lots of police presence here. There is a staging area for the media where I believe they're going to be addressing the media on what's going on here. But just to give you a little more information here, what we know from some reports is that this was reported this morning, again, in the Fort Worth area of Texas, and 3 women apparently have been involved in some sort of shootout, and we're told that 3 women are injured. It's at a Veritex bank, and it was reported shortly before 9:30 a.m. 2 of the women were taken to a local hospital, and the 3rd was taken to another hospital. Their injuries were not believed to be life-threatening, thank goodness, but they have sustained some gunshots. So that is what we know right now as far as this bank robbery goes, which is probably what you're seeing in your headline right now. That's what we're kind of focusing on here. You can see all the media lining that street. Police are still searching for apparently male suspects who were heavily armed in this. And as we get more details of this, we'll inform you as much as we can. I believe that this press conference that they're trying to set up here is going to inform the media a little bit more. So checking back for details. I believe some witnesses were able to give police some statements outside of the bank. But again, 3 women injured in this bank robbery or attempted bank robbery in Fort Worth. So that is that. Over now to Capitol Hill, we have some video of Bernie Sanders speaking right now on the Senate floor. So we'll flash you over there for just a little bit, and we'll keep an eye on this so we can get an update for you on this bank robbery. For now, guys, I'm Molly Nevola inside the newsroom here at Fox 5 DC in Washington. Let's go over to the Hill to check it out.
And that the president must cooperate with this investigation. Time and time again, I've heard Republicans, including leaders, make it clear that there should not be an interference in that investigation. Nothing new here on that point. And finally, nothing new here either. The Congress must make it clear to President Trump that his job is to protect the values that millions of Americans struggled, fought, and died to defend: justice, democracy, and equality. That he is the President of the United States, and his job is to protect the interests of the American people, not Russia. tweets, comments, and press conferences, and I know many of my Republican colleagues have been engaged in those activities. They are fine, they're constructive. But we need more from Republican senators now. It is time for the Senate to rein in the president's dangerous behavior. If their leadership, Senator McConnell, will not allow votes on this extraordinarily important matter, then my Republican colleagues must join with Democrats to make it happen, or all of their fine-sounding words of concern become meaningless. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that as if in legislative session, the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S-Res 582 submitted earlier today. I further ask that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
President.
Senator from Kentucky.
Trump derangement syndrome has officially come to the Senate. The hatred for the president is so intense that partisans would rather risk war than give diplomacy a chance. Does anybody remember that Ronald Reagan sat down with Gorbachev and we lessened the nuclear tensions? We need to still have those openings. Nobody is saying or excusing Russia's meddling in our elections. Absolutely, we should protect the integrity of our elections. But simply bringing the hatred of the president to the Senate floor in order to say, we're done with diplomacy, we're going to add more sanctions and more sanctions. You know what? I would rather that we still have open channels of discussion with the Russians. Kennedy, at the height of the Cold War, had a direct line to Khrushchev, and it may have prevented the end of the world. Should we be so crazy about partisanship that we now say, we don't want to talk to the Russians, we're not going to have relations with the Russians? We should stand firm and say, stay the hell out of our elections, but we should not stick our head in the ground and say, we're not going to talk to them. I would like to see the Russians leave Ukraine. I think we could do it through diplomacy. We're not going to have it if we don't talk to them. I would like to see the Russians help more with North Korea, with denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We're not going to have it if we just simply heap more sanctions on and say we're not going to talk to the Russians, and anybody that talks to the Russians has committed treason. For goodness sakes, we have the former head of the CIA, John Brennan, gallivanting across TV, now being paid for his opinion, to call the president treasonous. This has got to stop. This is crazy hatred of the president. This is crazy partisanship that is driving this. For goodness sakes, we don't excuse Russia's behavior in our election, but we don't have to have war. We can still have engagement. We have engaged Russia throughout 70 years while also acknowledging the imperfections of their system, the parts of their system that we vehemently disagree with, the lack of freedom, the lack of human rights, and yet we had open channels of negotiation, open channels of communication. So I could not object more strongly to this. Mr. President, I object.
Mr. President.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Vermont.
The senator from Kentucky just told us he wants dialogue with Russia. He wants diplomacy with Russia, that he thinks it's important that we communicate with Russia. I agree. Who disagrees with that? There is not one word in this resolution that suggests that the United States of America should not aggressively engage in diplomacy with Russia to ease the tensions that exist between the two countries. What the senator said is totally irrelevant to what is in this resolution. What this resolution says is we're going to tell Russia, stop interfering in our elections. What this resolution is about is to tell Russia to stop interfering with democratic countries all over the world in their elections. What this resolution is about is saying that we should implement the sanctions overwhelmingly voted by Congress. What this resolution is about is that we will not accept interference with the ongoing investigation of Special Counsel Robert Mueller, and that what this resolution says is the president must cooperate with the investigation of Mr. Mueller. That's what this resolution is about. It has nothing to do with ending diplomacy with Russia at all. So that is just inaccurate, and I would hope that if not today, in the very near future, Republicans will join Democrats and do the right thing in our effort to preserve American democracy. Thank you, Mr. President.
Well, guys, we'll keep you in and out of the breaking news on Capitol Hill and on the Senate floor as much as we can today as we see what is coming in on our cameras right now. I see a couple other videos being set up, but I want to show you some of the top stories from yesterday, including this one. If you guys caught it last night, the ESPY Awards were in LA, and there was a powerful moment on stage on your screen right here. 141 victims of Larry Nassar took to the stage and were honored with the Arthur Ashe Award for courage. A lot of people talking about just how powerful this moment was to end the night with a beautiful, powerful, solemn closing to the show, highlighting the past year's top athletes in sports. And these women, of course, honored for their courage. These are all survivors of women of Larry Nassar. And you could see there in the front, Allie Reisman, one of the most outspoken gymnasts in this case. She had some really powerful words as well. She said something to the extent of how they were ignored for so long and it could have been avoided, and that so many women up on that stage, dozens of those women that won that award last night, would not even be on that stage. They would never have met Larry Nassar if one adult had spoken up about these abuses and had brought this to light. And really powerful. We tracked a lot of that case, the Larry Nassar trial, and a lot of his case here on the channel. So they're back archived in our streams if you ever have interest to see some of their testimony. Really, really some powerful weeks of women testifying, coming out from years and years, decades old victims here of this abuser in Michigan. So that was the picture last night that was in Los Angeles, and really just a beautiful moment for sports and for the ESPY Awards themselves. So on now to some other top stories of today, guys. Here are some of the stuff we've been watching when it comes to President Trump and the trade war, and some other information about ICE and family reunification, some updates with that with children at the border, and then also an update on that fatal mid-air plane crash. If you remember that collision, we sort of took to our breaking news to air here, and police had more information on that story. That's all coming up here in our top stories.
One of the things I'm doing, as you know, with these trade deals that have been so unfair to our farmers.
The Chinese government escalating an already tense trade situation with the U.S., warning in its strongest language yet that Beijing will retaliate against new tariffs on Chinese products and will encourage its allies to follow suit.
Countries around the world will strike back more firmly if the U.S. continues to act in an arbitrary and reckless manner. It is a war triggered by the United States.
The agriculture industry is expected to be hardest hit by the tariffs, and as the trade war heats up, Congress is looking at the potential impact, asking farmers and ranchers to assess the risk to their businesses.
Agriculture is bearing the brunt of retaliation at a time when farmers are already facing low commodity prices, some high input costs, and of course, unpredictable weather.
Growers also point out the tariffs come amid rising payroll costs due to a lack of immigrant labor and plunging agriculture prices. The government predicting before the trade war that the U.S. farm income will drop this year to $60 billion, about half what it was 5 years ago. Many are now concerned the added trade pressure could force them out of business for good.
As a grower, it scares you. It is out of our pockets that these millions and millions of dollars will flow. And that's going to adversely affect rural Georgia and rural America.
Farmers and ranchers are not alone in sounding the alarm. A proposed tariff of 25% on imported autos could raise the price of imported cars in the United States by $6,000. At the White House, Doug McKelway, Fox News.
Abolish ICE! Abolish!
ICE is responsible to protect the sovereignty of this country.
It's been a tough few weeks for the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency known as ICE. Now, defenders of the embattled government agency, including its recently departed leader, are fighting back.
I've never met a bigger bunch of patriots, hardworking people that are dedicated to protecting this country.
Though barely 15 years in existence, this government agency now faces an existential crisis. Congress created ICE in 2003 as a direct response to the tragic events of 9/11 and gave the agency a unique double mandate: protect U.S. national security interests abroad and the public safety of Americans here at home. It has wide-ranging authority, but its primary mission is to enforce federal laws governing the U.S. border, customs, trade, and immigration. In a nutshell, ICE keeps the bad guys out.
On average, we stop 10 known or suspected terrorists per day from coming into the United States. And that's primarily the function of ICE and TSA working together.
Today, ICE has over 20,000 people who work in 400 offices in the U.S. and around the world, and an annual budget of approximately $6 billion. Now, lawmakers who oversee the agency and support its mission want the American people to know ICE is well worth the price tag.
They stop these human traffickers exploiting children, drug smugglers also.
In 2017 alone, ICE seized almost 1 million pounds of narcotics, including the deadly drugs heroin and fentanyl continuing to fuel the opioid crisis. Also last year, ICE arrested 143,000 criminal aliens they claim are responsible for 11,000 weapons offenses, 5,000 sexual assault offenses, 2,000 kidnapping offenses, and 1,800 homicide offenses. While many Democratic lawmakers may no longer see the utility of ICE, the majority of the American people do. A recent Fox News poll finds by a margin greater than 2-1, American voters are against disbanding the agency. In Washington, Jillian Turner, Fox News.
Busloads of parents have started arriving at the Annunciation House in El Paso. It's one of 4 locations around the country identified by the federal government to assist the migrant families once they're reunited with their children and released from ICE custody.
So the government is centralizing the release process.
Garcia says volunteers are working around the clock, from helping families locate housing or medical services to linking them up with immigration lawyers, since they'll have future court dates.
The pace of releases will increase dramatically in the next couple of days, to where we may be looking at as many as 100 individuals, 50 families per day that will come to us.
HHS says all but 71 of the 2,551 separated children ages 5 to 17 do have a parental match. However, the government will not disclose how many reunions have already taken place ahead of next Thursday's deadline.
Illegal entry doesn't disqualify you from getting your child back.
This as new battles continue in court. A federal judge this week temporarily halted the deportations of migrant families once they're reunited. The ruling was in response to a brief filed by the ACLU, which cited growing rumors of mass deportations being carried out immediately after the reunification.
We will have at least a week in which those families can consult about their options and decide what to do.
A lawyer with the U.S. Department of Justice expressed opposition to the week-long suspension of deportations, but did not address whether the rumors of mass deportations were in fact true. In Dallas, Casey Stiegel, Fox News.
Lava from Kilauea volcano has always attracted visitors who wanted to see the show in person. Mayor Kim says that Monday's lava bomb that hit the tour boat shows just how unpredictable lava viewing can be. So all safety measures had to be considered before a lava viewing area can be approved on land, which is done by the State Department of Health and the U.S. Geological Survey.
If you address the other things of safety, then that takes care of the liability. The liability comes into play when you disregard certain things and people get hurt, obviously, because you have to go into the numbers game.
Mayor Kim tells me viewers will have to be brought in either by bus or shuttle, so there wouldn't be a lot of traffic, and it wouldn't be an area where people can walk around in. The county would only charge for the cost of the operation. The idea is to help the businesses that have been devastated by this latest eruption.
Every business, I think, in the area of Volcano down to Pahoa area have lost businesses from 20 to 80%. And anything can help, and naturally that's our job. So we're going to try to keep looking for things. Hopefully things will stabilize a little better.
He adds that there was an area picked out on Pohoiki Road that was all cleared out and ready to go, but a cinder cone built up which blocked the viewing area.
Lo and behold, when it was ready to be planted to be the area, the cone became so tall that you couldn't even see the eruption.
So other areas are now being considered, and a site could be picked within a matter of days, if not weeks.
A fourth body found in the wreckage Wednesday morning. Recovery crews getting to work as the sun came up to search for the missing person who went down with 3 others when the 2 small planes collided above the Everglades Tuesday afternoon.
That fourth body has been identified as Carlos Alfredo Zanetti Scarpati. He's a 22-year-old white male. We have spoken to the family. The family was on scene, and again, it's heartbreaking.
The FAA says it was a Piper PA-34 and a Cessna 172, both believed to be flight training. The killer collision sparking a swift multi-agency response.
We're out here training with our airboat, and once we received the call, we were able to immediately respond to the area.
Debris raining down from the sky.
Look at all the pieces falling.
Captured on cell phone video by a man fishing in the Everglades at the time.
Holy bro, plane just fell.
Poor people. They probably died on impact.
No survivors. Among the 4 people dead, 19-year-old Nisha Seagual, a pilot, as well as 22-year-old George Sanchez and 72-year-old Ralph Knight. The planes said to be from the same place, Dean International. It's the flight school that's had its share of mid-air problems, including an Everglades crash last May in which both on board survived. There were also 2 July crashes last year, with one of those resulting in the death of a pilot.
That's something that the FAA is going to have to look at along with NTSB as far as the school itself. The Miami-Dade Police Department, of course, our main focus is going to be the death investigation.
Really sad story down there in the Everglades. If you were with us yesterday, we were kind of tracking that as it broke, and we were reporting 3 victims, but unfortunately they did find a 4th victim. Everyone in those 2 plane crashes died. Really, really sad story down there in Florida. We're back though with a little more live video coming out of Capitol Hill right now. Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona is now speaking on the Senate floor, so let's jump over there and see what he has to say in D.C.
No matter how powerful and strong Putin's denial. To reject these findings and to reject the excruciating specific indictment against the 12 named Russian operatives in deference to the word of a KGB apparatchik is an act of will on the part of the president. And that choice now leaves us contemplating the dark mystery. Why did he do that? What would compel our president to do such a thing? Those are questions that urgently beg for an answer, and it is our job to find that answer. But what isn't a mystery is that by choosing to reject object reality in Helsinki, the president let down the free world by giving aid and comfort to an enemy of democracy. In so doing, he dimmed the light of freedom ever so slightly in our own country. Such is the power that we vest in the presidency. Such are the consequences when a president does not use that power well. I can add no further to the extraordinary and thoroughly justified response of my fellow Americans from across the political spectrum to the events in Helsinki, ranging from heartbreak to horror. But I will say that if ever there was a moment to think not of just your party, but for the country, this is it. This is not a moment for spin, deflection, justification, circling the wagons, forgetting, moving on to the next news cycle, or for more of Orwell's doublespeak. No, when the American government offers an onslaught on unreality, it puts the whole world at risk. That is the lesson of Helsinki. That is the dose of reality that hit hard. We have indulged myths and fabrications, pretended that it wasn't so bad, and our indulgence got us the capitulation in Helsinki. We in the Senate who have been elected to represent our constituents cannot be enablers of falsehoods. This bipartisan resolution from the senator from Delaware and I that we have here today commends the Department of Justice for its thorough investigation that has led to the indictment of 12 Russian operatives who, on behalf of the Russian government, interfered in the 2016 election. It acknowledges that such efforts by the Russian government to undermine our elections, as confirmed by our own Director of National Intelligence, continue. Specifically, the Flake Coons resolution rejects the denial of election interference by Russian President Vladimir Putin, something that our president failed to do when given the opportunity in a public forum in Helsinki on Monday. This resolution calls for the full and immediate implementation of mandatory sanctions passed by a vote of 98-2 to deter and punish election interference by the Russian government. If there are waivers that are needed, and there are some needed, for the Indian government, for example, for weapons they purchased from the Russian government or hardware, there is a waiver process already in law for that, and I would support that. Finally, the resolution calls on the relevant committees of the Senate to exercise oversight, including prompt hearings and obtaining relevant notes and information to understand what commitments were made by the President at the summit and the impact it will have on our foreign policy going forward. The Russian ambassador last night said that, quote, important verbal agreements were made. Mr. President, we need to know the details of those agreements. Mr. President, empirical, objective truth has taken a beating for the last 18 months. I said from this pulpit in January that the dissemination of untruths has the effect of eroding trust in our vital institutions and conditioning the public to no longer trust them. As we saw in Helsinki on Monday, entertaining the untruths of a dictator has the same effect. Passing this resolution will let our constituents, the administration, our allies, and our adversaries know that here in the Senate, we do not entertain the deceit of dictators. The truth is, Russia interfered in our elections in 2016, and these efforts continue. Accepting that truth is the first step in preparing us to confront this malign activity. Mr. President, I ask for unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the consideration of S-Res 583 submitted earlier today. I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid on the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Majority Whip.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object. Let me first thank the Senator from Arizona and the Senator from Delaware for expressing all of our concern about Russian interference in the 2016 election. It's absolutely clear they did, and the President has said as much on a number of occasions. Now, I agree in Helsinki, he was less than clear about that, but he came back and said that he misspoke and reaffirmed his earlier position that, yes, the Russian government had attempted to interfere in the election, although nobody disputes the fact that they were unsuccessful in changing a single vote or affecting the outcome. Ironically, the very same investigation, which has made clear that the Russians did attempt to disrupt the election, has also made clear there is no evidence of collusion that anybody has uncovered to date. So my concern is with this resolution is that it is purely a symbolic act And what we need to do is not just offer symbolic resolutions on the floor. We need to do the hard work that senators have to do through the regular order. In other words, our committees that have jurisdiction over these issues ought to be permitted to call the witnesses and ask the hard questions and develop the record before we go on record as to a resolution like this. I would point out that the indictments that were referred to, apparently, according to published reports, Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, asked the President before Helsinki should he withhold announcement of those indictments or go ahead before the summit. And the President said, no, go ahead. Well, anybody who's read the 29 pages of the indictment issued at the request of Robert Mueller by a grand jury here in the District of Columbia knows there is chapter and verse of how Russians attempted to interfere with the election. It's a good and important read, but the President knew that before he went to Helsinki, so to me, it gives me some confidence that he did indeed misspeak, especially in light of his subsequent affirmations of Russian interference in the election. I happen to be privileged to sit on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. We have been conducting bipartisan investigation of the Russian matter for the entire time that the President has been in office, for the last year and a half. We've already issued some preliminary reports. That's the way to do our work, is through bipartisan committee work, have the witnesses come and testify, ask them hard questions, and render our judgment. I know that Secretary Pompeo is coming before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee sometime next week. He ought to be asked hard questions, and I'm confident he will respond to those questions. But that's how we get the information we need. Let me just say that I think we should consider sanctions, not sort of sense of the Senate resolutions that have no sting or no impact, certainly no deterrent effect on what we all want to discourage, which is Russian involvement in our 2018 elections. And that's why the Majority Leader today asked the Chairman of the Banking and Foreign Relations Committee to hold hearings and recommend additional measures that could respond to or deter Russian malign behavior. That's the way we ought to do our work, through our committees of jurisdiction, because you know what? When we rush to judgment and we try to do resolutions like this, we can inadvertently make mistakes. And let me point out one that's in this resolution. There's a reference to the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, which passed the Senate 98-2 to deter and punish election interference by the Russian Federation. There is a provision in the current conference committee on the Defense Authorization Committee that would issue a waiver of that act to our partner, India. Now, if we want to encourage countries like India to come to partner with the United States of America, the world's largest democracy and the world's oldest democracy, then we ought to be all about encouraging that movement toward us and away from the Russian Federation. And I worry there's no reference in here to the waiver provision in the Defense Authorization Conference Committee that India has asked for and that Secretary Mattis has requested that Congress grant. So all I'm asking for is a little bit of caution here that in the rush to issue a resolution, we, number one, I don't think acknowledge the full picture, but we also don't commit our work to the committees that have jurisdiction over these matters to do it carefully and thoughtfully in a bipartisan way so we come up with the best solution to the problem. So, Madam President, I just think this is the wrong way to go about it. I think our committees ought to continue to do their work. The Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, the Defense, Armed Services Committee, the Foreign Relations Committee, and the Banking Committee, and we ought to come up with the right kind of bipartisan answer, which I think could well be increased sanctions against the Russian Federation to deter them from meddling in our 2018 elections and beyond, because I'm confident they will continue until we stop them from doing so. So, Madam President, I would object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, Madam President.
The senator from Arizona.
I think it's regrettable that this was objected to. We will bring it back. The majority leader said that this is just a symbolic vote. It is. And symbolism is important. Obviously, we have underlying sanctions that we ought to fully implement. If there are waivers that are needed, there's a waiver process already in the NDAA authorization. And I support those waivers with regard to India. This does not affect that. This simply says, in a symbolic way, that we in the Senate don't buy Vladimir Putin's rejection or his denial of election interference. That was put in question this week, whether our government believes that or not. We here in the Senate should stand and say, we don't believe it. We know that the intelligence is right. We stand behind our intelligence community. We need to say that in the Senate. Yes, it's symbolic, and symbolism is important. Our agencies of government need to know that we stand behind them. That's what this is about. So I hope that we will pass this. I note regretfully that there's been an objection to it, but we'll bring it back. I believe that this should pass, and I believe it ultimately will pass. And with that, I yield back.
Madam President,
The majority leader.
I ask unanimous consent that notwithstanding Rule 22, the post-closure time on the Bounds nomination expire at 1:45 p.m. today. Further, that if confirmed, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, and the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action.
Is there objection? Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that following disposition of the Bounds nomination, the Senate resume legislative session and proceed to the immediate consideration of a Schumer resolution that is at the desk. Further, that the Senate immediately vote on the resolution, that if agreed to, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection? Without objection. The senator from Delaware.
Madam President, I just wanted to join my colleague from Arizona in briefly remarking on my regret that our resolution was not adopted today. It does call for the full implementation of mandatory sanctions provided for in CATSA, as discussed at some length. But it does not call for the reckless implementation of mandatory sanctions. There are a significant range of sanctions already provided for in this law, adopted by 98-2 by this body, that have not yet been adopted. I recognize that this resolution, standing strong behind the Department of Justice, the intelligence community, and its ongoing investigation is, as was referenced, a symbolic act. But there are moments when symbolism and standing together are important. And I look forward to continuing to work closely with my colleague and friend from Arizona to ensure that this resolution is adopted, that the American people and the men and women of our federal law enforcement agencies and our intelligence community understand that this body strongly supports them and their work and sees clearly the ongoing and continuing threat to our democracy posed by President Putin and Putin's Russia. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President.
The Democratic leader.
First, before I talk about the resolution that Senators Menendez, Schatz, and myself will be that we have authored, that will be voted on at 1:45. I'd like to say a few words about the work of my friends from Delaware and Arizona, and my severe disappointment that there was objection from the Republican leadership. The bottom line is very simple. President Trump has put our country in a foreign policy crisis. President Trump has weakened the security of this country. A resolution is the minimum we can do. The minimum. We should be acting. And the idea that we cannot even pass a resolution in this body because of the objection of the other side, when this was done in a bipartisan, careful way by the senators from Arizona and Delaware, shows something very bad. That our colleagues on the other side of the aisle are so cowed by a president that they cannot stand up for national security. They cannot stand up to Vladimir Putin, just as the president seems not to be able to. And I'd say one more point. From what I am told, One of the major objections from the other side was the including of contemporaneous notes, that Congress wished that contemporaneous notes in that secret meeting for 2 hours be made available. That is key. What are they hiding? What are they afraid of? Don't the American people have a right to know what went on in that meeting, particularly when President Putin gets up and talks about some agreements that it seems not even our high-ranking officials in the state, defense, intelligence departments know about? This is amazing. We have come to a really low moment in this body when a bipartisan resolution that is rather modest, that was limited. I had talked to my friend from Delaware. He knows I wanted much more in this resolution. But in effort to get something done, we limited it. My view, the view of most Americans, the notes should be made available. The translator should be made available. The translator wasn't specifically referred to in this resolution, but when they talked about relevant people coming, my view, and I believe the view of the senator from Delaware, was that that would include the translator. I'm not sure if it was the view of my friend from Arizona, but it doesn't matter. We're not even passing this resolution. I have to say, this was a moment for bipartisanship. This was a moment for America pulling together. This was a moment when the president doesn't serve the country well, that Americans of all parties, all ideologies come together and fill that void and undo the misdeeds that occurred in Helsinki. Unfortunately, because of weakness, fear, my guess is if you looked inside the hearts and minds of every member on the other side, all but maybe one or two would feel this is the right resolution. But they're afraid. Fear will not get us anywhere. Letting a bully push us around, meaning President Putin, as he pushed President Trump around, will not serve this country well. It's a sad moment that this resolution was rejected. Now, before I yield to my good friend, the hardworking and very, very able head of the ranking member of the Foreign Relations Committee, I just want to talk on our resolution, which we are going to get a vote on. Lord knows if we couldn't have even gotten a vote on that. The idea that an American ambassador who served us so well should be brought before Putin and his minions to be questioned when there is no charge against him, no issue against him. It's not like the 12 Russians who were indicted for trying to interfere with our elections. There's not even an analogy. There's not even an evenness. And President Trump amazingly called this an incredible offer. Our president is saying that one of our ambassadors to be hauled before an authoritarian regime that twists the truth, that lies at will, that even seems to kill people they want to with poison in other countries. And that's an incredible offer? Well, this resolution is a fine resolution. It'll pass. It doesn't undo what just happened. It doesn't make up for the fact that our colleagues are afraid to take real action, and even a resolution that posits action in terms of the major misdeeds at Helsinki. But at the very least, we're protecting the integrity of men and women who serve us. Because if today it's the ambassador, tomorrow it could be somebody in the military or somebody in the intelligence agencies or elsewhere. So this resolution is very clear. What it says is what President Trump, when President Trump called Putin's offer an incredible offer, he was incredibly wrong. No president can put one of our fine servants who've worked hard, in this case, for the diplomatic corps at risk. and this resolution a bare minimum of what we should be doing here, I'm glad it will be on the floor, and I suspect it will pass, hopefully unanimously. I yield the floor to my colleague from New Jersey.
Madam President.
The Senator from New Jersey.
Madam President, I'm very pleased to join with the distinguished Democratic leader in co-authoring this resolution. Before I speak to it, I do want to speak to the Flake-Coons resolution. I certainly would have supported it, although I believe it's the minimum of what this body should be expressing after what we saw in Helsinki. This is a moment for bipartisanship and for patriotism, because what I saw in Helsinki speaks to the opposite of standing up to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. And I find it interesting in the majority whip's objection to the resolution coming to a vote that, among other things, he's talking about we should have more sanctions against Russia, which I will speak to shortly. We are in the midst of developing a new strong package of sanctions as it relates to Russia. So I embrace and welcome him to that effort if he seeks to actually see real sanctions against Russia. But, you know, we have sanctions. There are sanctions that passed 98-2 in this institution, passed overwhelmingly in the House of Representatives, forced the president to sign it as a result of overwhelming votes, and yet have not been fulfilled. Sanctions that were largely mandatory but have not been fulfilled. So we could start off by having a robust engagement of the existing sanctions, and I'm not quite sure how we start being tough on Russia. One of the elements of those sanctions was to go after Russia's defense sales of defense weapons, and here we're already looking for waivers. So there's a difference between a country that maybe has a long history of buying Russian military equipment, but the S-400, a new anti-defense system, that's a new version. That's not a legacy issue. So I'm not sure how we're going to tell one country you can buy the S-400, but another country you can't. It doesn't work. That's how sanctions begin to crumble at the end of the day. But I welcome the response that we should be having new sanctions. Now, as it relates to this resolution, it's outrageous that the White House would not instantaneously and firmly dismiss a proposition that Russian prosecutors would come question a former United States ambassador. Again and again, we have seen President Trump take Vladimir Putin's word. And it's unconscionable that this White House would give anything other than a full-throated defense of America's Foreign Service, like Ambassador Mike McFaul, who served our country with honor and distinction. The reason that Putin doesn't like Mike McFaul is because as our U.S. ambassador, he stood up for democracy, human rights in Russia. He stood up to the Russian regime. He promoted American values and ideals. He spoke truth to power inside of Russia. That's why Putin wants him. Congress shouldn't have to tell America's president to stand up for America's public servants and its diplomatic corps, but apparently we have to. President Trump has repeatedly dismissed Russia's attack in 2016, and he shrugs off the threat it poses today despite all of its intelligence agencies and the Director of National Intelligence just days ago saying there are red blinking lights about Russia's continual engagement and interference in the elections that will take place 110 days from now. This week, he continuously and directly contradicted his own national security advisors and instead embraced the line of Putin and Russian intelligence. Now, I know they've been trying to clean it up, but he's said it so many times the same way he said it in Helsinki. That's what he really believes. That's what he really believes. And now to say something different, wrong time, wrong continent, not too much. He spouted talking points that sound like they're straight from the Kremlin. He's shown a willingness to accede to Putin's request to interrogate Americans, a willingness to accept Putin's denials about Russian interference, a willingness to attack NATO allies like Montenegro, and a willingness to be a supplicant to Putin's views. The president keeps claiming he's been tough on Russia. No, it's Congress that has been tough on Russia by passing the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act with broad and deep bipartisan support. But the White House hasn't taken it seriously. They've ignored a series of mandates in the law. The clear tone and intent coming from the Helsinki summit was one of accommodation, not of pressure. Madam President, I don't see any other way forward other than further congressional action to forcefully call out and address the administration's willful paralysis to Putin's abhorrent behavior. Our efforts to date have been transformative, but just as the administration has been prepared to find ways that allow them to circumvent the law and avoid implementing mandatory provisions of CAATSA, we must be equally prepared to adjust and adapt by closing those loopholes. That's why I will soon introduce comprehensive legislation to increase pressure to actually implement the law and increase pressure on Russia for its aggression against the United States and our allies. Among the considerations we have for this new legislation will be to increase sanctions on Russia.
If you guys are still on with us on our stream, that's the Senate floor. Senate Democrats debating this new resolution that actually right now the House is actually talking about in a press conference. So we're going to jump over to this House Democrats who are holding a press conference to introduce the Secure America from Russian Interference Act, a new act that they're bringing to the table here. And let's jump over there. This is what they have to say.
Openly and complicitly, murdering its opponents, attacking Western democracies and our critical NATO alliance. Today, my colleagues and I have introduced H.R. 6437, the Secure America for Russia Interference Act. This bipartisan, comprehensive legislation will do what President Trump has repeatedly failed to do: hold Russia accountable, strengthen our election security, and bolster our alliances. This legislation brings together a number of bills, I think a list of which you have in your possession, many bipartisan, that are aimed at safeguarding our national security and protecting Americans' rights to cast their ballots and have their vote counted accurately. Congress must, it should, the American people expect us to adopt a bipartisan and unambiguous strategy to counter Russia's destabilizing activity. After President Trump's surprising and yes, even shameful display in Helsinki, some Republicans have expressed concern, but press reports indicate they are throwing up their hands and saying there's nothing we can do. But there is something we can do. Bring this legislation to the fore and pass it with strong bipartisan support. Congress surely should do everything in its power to protect the American people. And this legislation is a step in the right direction. I want to thank all the members who worked hard on its provisions. Representative Engel, Representative Waters, Representative Swazi, Representative Carbajal, Representative Castro, Representative Connolly, Representative Correa, Representative Demings, Representative Heck, Representative Kennedy, Representative Kilmer, Representative Krishnamurthy, Representative Moulton, and Representative Thompson. And I also want to thank my colleagues across the aisle, Representatives Stefanik and Jones, for their support of this important legislation. I'm now pleased to yield to the ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Mr. Eliot Engel of New York. Eliot?
Thank you, Mr. Whip. Thank you, and thank my fellow members here as well. I'm Eliot Engel from New York. ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I authored a part of this excellent bill that Mr. Hoyer has put together. We all know what a disgrace this week has been. President's embarrassing performance, playing into the hands of our chief adversary, Vladimir Putin, the sloppy damage control from the White House that at the end of the day just reaffirms what Mr. Trump said in Helsinki, and here on Capitol Hill, the phony protests of congressional Republicans who are throwing up their hands and complaining, "We've done so much already, what else can we do?" The idea that Congress has exhausted all its options to rein in the administration and push back on Russia is just preposterous. Relative to the size of the threat we're facing, Congress has done next to nothing. It's like saying a hurricane just smashed the coast and another is on the way. Let's send a few rolls of paper towels. So the next time we hear the question, what more can Congress do? Here's the answer. This piece of legislation right here. Right here. Here's the answer. The one we all put together under Mr. Hoyer's leadership. The part I wrote, along with Jerry Connolly of Virginia, would ratchet up sanctions. Unlike the sanction package we passed last year, this measure specifically goes after anyone who interferes with the American elections from overseas, or anyone who interfered in the past. And the past is important because we have a good deal of knowledge that the Russians did intercede. This is especially important that we look back in light of Special Counsel Mueller's most recent indictments of 12 Russian intelligence officers. We're learning more and more about just how damaging Russia's attack was, about the tactics they used to support Donald Trump, Putin's preferred candidate, as he himself admitted. We cannot let those responsible off the hook. That's what we're attempting to do today. All of us standing up here have been pushing the administration since day one to take this threat seriously, to protect our democracy. But I don't think the stakes have been clearer than they are this week. The President made it clear that he's taking Putin's side over our American intelligence community. What a shame. What a disgrace. Over law enforcement, over our friends and allies around the world. It's unbelievable that we would stand here and say that about an American president. But we all saw it with our own eyes. It's not political spin or political hype. We saw what the president did. He sided with Putin over American intelligence. He sided with Russia over the United States. That means to meet this challenge, it needs to start right here in the Congress. As long as President Trump abdicates his responsibility to defend the United States, it's up to us. We won't stand by when the president is acting as Putin's poodle. There's more we can do and must do. This bill will put us on that path. So I thank you, and I'm happy to introduce my friend from California, the ranking member of the Financial Services Committee, Maxine Waters.
Thank you. Thank you, Ranking Member Ingle. But let me just say a special word of thanks to Steny Hoyer. This is long overdue. The American people are expecting us to resist some of the policies and initiatives and actions that this president has shown to the American people. And the way that he's defined himself, we really need to take time to address the issues. And so it is absolutely essential that Congress take strong action to counter the malign activities of Russia and Putin, protect our democracy from their harmful actions, and move swiftly to pass this critical package of bills, the Secure America from Russia Interference Act. Back in April of 2017, I introduced the No Russia Exemptions for Oil Production Act. The bill prevents the Trump administration from circumventing Russia's sanctions that banned oil deals in the Russian Arctic Shelf, the Black Sea, and Siberia by restricting the export of technology that Russia would need in order to be able to drill for oil in these areas. Under current law, the President can provide waivers or special licenses to companies to engage in activities related to oil exploitation and drilling in Russia. It is clear that the President should not have this authority, so my bill would revoke his discretion to provide these waivers. It has never been more apparent that Putin has something over this President. My bill is one step to stop the pro-Russia actions of this President, who just this week put on a shameful display of bowing down to Putin to the detriment of the United States. To that end, I'm pleased that my bill is included in this important package of legislation that we are introducing today to hold Russia accountable and safeguard our country. So I thank you. Next, we will hear from Congressman Nadler, the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Maxine. I want to begin by thanking our distinguished Democratic whip, Mr. Hoyer, for bringing us together today and for bringing this legislation today, for amalgamating many different bills the Democratic members have put together to form a comprehensive response to the Russian aggression against our democratic system. From one day to the next, President Trump does not seem to know where he stands on the issue of Russian interference in our elections. But the American people know where they stand when a foreign power attacks our democracy. And this bill presents a clear and unambiguous strategy for countering Russian aggression in the United States and abroad. On July 10, 2001, the Phoenix field office of the FBI forwarded a memorandum to headquarters to advise the Bureau of an effort by Osama bin Laden to send associates to the United States to enroll in civil aviation courses. For a host of complicated reasons, the Bush administration did not follow up adequately, and 2 months later, on September 11th, in my district, tragically, the World Trade Center attacked and fell. Last Friday, Special Counsel Robert Mueller indicted 12 Russian nationals for hacking into the Democratic National Committee, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and several state election systems. This indictment is a remarkable piece of forensic work. With the aid of the intelligence community, the special counsel can name the specific Russian military intelligence officers at the keyboard on a given day. This latest indictment can surely be seen as the equivalent of the warning signs prior to 9/11. In the words of Dan Coates, a distinguished former Republican senator and President Trump's hand-picked director of national intelligence, our digital infrastructure is literally under attack by the Russian government as we speak. These indictments are a warning, and we must heed the warning. In Helsinki, President Trump said he does not believe it. He sided with Vladimir Putin over his own intelligence community. Then he reversed course and said he just misspoke, thinking the American people would buy his manipulated story over what we all witnessed for ourselves. And yesterday, he again contradicted his director of national intelligence. When asked whether Russia was still targeting the United States, the president answered no. President Trump's continued state of denial undermines American law enforcement, proclaiming on the world stage that our laws are meaningless, that the work of investigators has been worthless, and that no one should take the special counsel seriously. That is a catastrophe in the making. If we do not take any action, the American people may not trust the outcome of the next election. Our Republican colleagues have chosen to hide their heads in the sand. They want us to endlessly investigate Hillary Clinton's emails and vote on meaningless resolutions that they think will make a nice press release. But we intend to act. I am proud to stand with my colleagues today, and I hope the Republican leadership will stand with us too. They should stand up to the president and stand up for America and pass this legislation to protect the integrity of our elections so that we can be confident in our elections, and to stand up to the Russians and tell them you cannot attack the United States without paying a very, very high price. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nadler. Thank you, Mr. Engel, and thank you, Ms. Waters. As you will note from the list of bills that are included within this comprehensive piece of legislation, although I mentioned two Republicans who are co-sponsors, you will note that many of the bills that are incorporated in this legislation are supported by Republicans, are co-sponsored by Republicans as well. We believe this should be a bipartisan effort. The confronting an enemy that tries to undermine our democracy, our elections, our integrity in our newscasting is an enemy that needs to be confronted in a bipartisan way. This is not about Republicans or Democrats. This is about America. This is about our country. This is about our security. And hopefully we can join together in working on this legislation. Mr. Cohen was up here, but Mr. Cohen has a significant piece of this legislation. So I thank all of you for being here, and we'll open it up for questions. Chad? Well, we just introduced it today.
That gets us to September. And there's not enough time to do that now. I mean, a lot of people say, if you're talking about July, the horse is out of the barn to be able to do anything structural that would make a difference to protect the integrity.
Well, on the election, I think we could move pretty quickly. We could move next week. I was very disappointed, as you heard me say in the colloquy, that the Republicans to a person rejected, and the Democrats to a person supported, rejected an opportunity which would not have any effect on the bill. Mr. Frelinghuysen, the chairman of the committee, in speaking in opposition to the amendment, didn't mention the amendment. He said it was a good bill. It was a good bill, which this amendment, Mr. Quigley's amendment, would have had no adverse effect whatsoever. What it would have done is strengthen the ability of the United States of America and our election officials throughout this country to secure our voting apparatus. And I would hope we could at least do that, as I said in the colloquy today. Yeah. Well, of course, regular order is not always followed, as you know, but I think my trusty senior policy advisor is saying 6. Yes. Look, I think it has been a consistent position of Democratic and Republican administrations and an agreement within NATO itself that there would be a 2% target. I think the president was reiterating our support for that target and urging our European allies to achieve that target. Having said so, no previous president has been so confrontational as opposed to cooperative with our close allies and friends. And in my opinion, while he was appropriate in urging the objective, he was inappropriate in the way he did it. Yes.
Have there been any briefings from the administration, formal or informal, about what
Well, let me yield to Mr. Engel, who may, none that I have participated in. Let me yield to Mr. Engel, who's on the Foreign Affairs Committee, ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee.
Well, the answer would be no. I mean, I would hope at some point the answer would be yes, but the fact is we really don't know. And the president, of course, has contradicted himself so many times that you don't even know if he knows what he knows. I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous. He meant to say this, he didn't really mean that, and then the next day he goes back to what he originally said. So I cannot think in the history of our country, with all the presidents we've had, that we have had a president who has been so belligerent towards our allies. What the president's done, he's hurt the NATO alliance, he's hurt the European Union. He made fun of Macedonia. The United States wouldn't. Part of the important principles of NATO is that an attack on one country is an attack on all countries. And the president said, well, the United States wouldn't necessarily go to war over Macedonia, singled out Macedonia. It's really just not the way anybody should act, let alone the leader of the free world. So Congress is the last person they consult with when they make a move or when they make a declaration. But to tell you the truth, I don't think the president consulted with his own people. I just think what he shoots from the hip, whatever is in his mind comes out. And I'll bet his own people, when they see it come out and he starts ad-libbing, they think, oh my God, what's he going to say now? I cannot tell you. I've been in this Congress 30 years. I cannot tell you another time, because there is no other time, where any president of the United States had such a sorry and poor performance and appearance on the world stage.
Yeah, let me just add, you may have noticed that the Russians have announced that they are going to begin implementing the agreements that were reached between President Trump and President Putin. Now, we have no idea of what agreements, if any, were reached, but the Russians have announced that they're going to begin implementing the agreements. It's unconscionable, if agreements were reached, that we don't know what they are, that the president doesn't tell us what they are. It is unprecedented for an American president to meet with a foreign leader without someone else present, without other Americans present, other than the interpreter. But to hear from the Russians now that there are agreements reached, and they won't tell us what those agreements were, is beyond imagination.
Just let me, in finishing that question, say that domestically, here in the Congress, with the administration, almost invariably you have other people in the room on both sides when they're having a discussion about things of importance. Not because of any wrongdoing per se, but because there is a necessity to make sure that you get it right. That there is, in fact, a meeting of the minds, not a talking past one another. We don't know. The administration, Secretary of State doesn't know. The National Security Advisor doesn't know. They only know what Trump told them. And frankly, we have seen a demonstration over the last years of the accuracy of the president's representations of facts. Last question.
I have a question for Congressman Waters.
All right, guys, let's switch gears a little bit. Coming back into the newsroom here at Fox 5 DC. I'm Molly Nevola here in the newsroom, and we have a lot of stuff coming in from the Senate floor, from the House, of course, this act now to end Russian interference. And we're going to be hearing a lot more from that throughout the day. So I'm sure we'll be jumping back into that. But I want to go over quickly to something that just happened moments ago down in Houston. If you remember, this was the case from last fall, 2017. It was a student at a school there called Cypress Fairbanks who was expelled for not standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. That student is now filing a suit against the school citing discrimination. Last October, they actually revoked the expulsion of that student, and then sort of the case continued on and ensued. Now the student is filing a suit against the school, and one of, I believe, her lawyers was speaking about this, and this was just about an hour ago down in Houston. So check out our feed from our sister station down there.
Who kneeled, the NFL players who kneeled for the national anthem. And it singled out India, who's African American, as well as another African American student who for not standing for the pledge. So what has happened is a very great victory for the freedom of speech that we have in this country by this judge's ruling. And so that's what we're here today to announce, that this fine ruling by the judge, as well as to judge said we can move forward is a charge of equal protection, or in non-lawyer terms, racial discrimination. That is the judge pointed out like 4 instances in our complaint where the school district was concerned about or talking about African Americans. They mentioned negatively people who kneeled, the NFL players who kneeled for the national anthem. And it singled out India, who's African American, as well as another African American student who for not standing for the pledge. So what has happened is a very great victory for the freedom of speech that we have in this country by this judge's ruling. And so that's what we're here today to announce, that this fine ruling by the judge, as well as to tell you about the other individuals at the Cy-Fair Independent School District that are also involved in the case. And I guess if you have any questions.
Love to talk
Sure.
to India.
All right.
India, just because we've been following this case, but tell us why you decided to remain respectfully seated at school during the recitation of the pledge.
Well, I felt the flag doesn't represent what it stands for, liberty and justice for all, and I don't feel that's what's going on in the country today. So it was my choice to remain seated silently. It's a silent protest.
You had to pay a price for that.
Mm-hmm.
Filing lawsuits, you kicked out of school, disrupting your life. Has it been worth it?
Has it been worth it? Yeah, I think so. I'm like kind of disappointed and embarrassed of what happened because I don't get the same privileges as everybody else, you know, if I would have stood. But the case is coming along. I'm glad that it's a favorable ruling. So, yeah, I think it's worth it. It's going to be worth it in the end.
This issue has been continuing in our country, conversation in our country, since the incident. Have your feelings evolved? Do you feel as strongly now, today, as you did then? And if so, why?
I do, because I feel like I'm standing for the people without a voice, like inspiring others. Like now, like some people, like some of my friends, you know, they stand now. They were scared to now, and I stood up for that. I believe, like, stand for something or you'll fall for anything.
What is it that you stand for? What or sit for? You're sitting.
What's
that
sit
about for you?
just justice, because like I don't believe that represents. The flag doesn't represent what it says.
What do you hope to achieve in this lawsuit?
Hopefully my diploma. That's what's most important.
They've denied you a diploma.
Yeah, later than others.
Have you completed your academic studies, or do you have to go back to school?
Well, they're trying to make me enter this program that has to do. It's a military school. It's a discipline school, but I don't feel I should be disciplined for something that's not fair to me.
Ms. Landry, can we speak to you as well?
Sure.
When you got the call, your daughter was being expelled. What went through your heart and mind, and tell me how your feelings evolved? You're supporting your daughter.
I was very disappointed with the school, and I was actually kind of nervous and scared when I got the call because they were threatening with saying they were going to get the police and throw her out. So the things that were running through my mind let me hurry up and get to her, because the things that I see going on in the media today, how we're being racially discriminated and handled really roughly by police officers, I just wanted to hurry up and get to her because I was scared for my child. And I support her 100% because, and I'm actually proud of her because a lot of people would not stand up for something like this. Some people are scared to do this, you know, but she's very brave, and I just support her 100% on it.
The easier route, the expedient, would have been to say, maybe we're not going to fight this fight, wait till you're 18, and what you made a different decision. You stood on principle. Can you talk about that?
Well, I always support my children on anything they want to do, and how can I put it? we just really wanted to try to get her back into school. It wasn't, we didn't even want all of this, you know, at first. I had a lot of meetings with the teacher. I was calling the superintendent, and they just refused to let her into school. So that's when it came to like, okay, we don't have any other choice. So I contacted the media to try to put some pressure on them to like let her back in school. So that's, we didn't want this, but if this is what it's going to take to get what she needs and justice, that's what we're going to do.
Progressing towards trial now, that's a whole different thing. Alan and able attorney. Would you like for this to go to trial and draw the type of attention to the issue that a full-blown trial would attract?
Yes, definitely. Definitely, because this has to stop. You know, this going on in our country has to stop. You know, I think that everybody should stand up for stuff like this. You know, like.
All right, guys, so just a little insight into that case from last year that's coming all full circle today because the student is now suing the school. Unfortunately, the sound was a little bit rough on that one, so we'll pull you away from that feed and go over to St. Louis, where Vice President Pence just landed. Air Force 2 just landed in St. Louis, and now Vice President is delivering keynote remarks at an America First rally entitled Tax Cuts to Put America First. This is at the Marriott in downtown St. Louis, and Vice President Pence is already up at the podium. Take a look at his keynote remarks.
We promise to confront countries like China that have been taking advantage of America for far too long. And this president took decisive action to defend our steel and aluminum industries, industries that really are the backbone of our economy and our security. And the president promised to deliver for American farmers just like they deliver for us every day all across Missouri. We've been forging new and better trade deals that are a win for Americans in the city and on the farm. As we speak, I'm proud to report to you, we are making significant progress reforming and improving the North American Free Trade Agreement. We've opened Argentina to pork, opened Vietnam to corn and wheat, and Brazil to American beef. And as the president said, we will always stand 100% with and for American farmers. And finally, what brings us all here today was one of the biggest promises of all after our national security. This president promised that we would cut taxes across the board for working families, small businesses, and family farms. And with the support of every Republican in Congress from Missouri, just before Christmas, President Trump signed the largest tax cuts and tax reform in American history. That's promises made and promises kept. I mean, think about it. We cut taxes for working families. Our estimate is the typical family of four in the St. Louis area is going to save nearly $2,600 every year on their taxes. We cut taxes for businesses large and small so the companies here in Missouri can compete and win against companies anywhere in the world and create jobs right here in the Show Me State. We eliminated the death tax for nearly every American farmer so family farms can stay in the families. And when we cut taxes, in case you didn't notice it, we cut out the core of Obamacare. The individual mandate in Obamacare is gone. It's off the books. Now, I do understand that we're not the only ones cutting taxes these days. Just last week, your Governor Mike Parsons signed into law the largest single-year income tax cut in Missouri history. In fact, if you like the sound of that, I'm proud to report that the leader who authored that legislation is with us today. Would you join me in thanking Speaker Pro Tem of the Missouri House, Elijah Haar? Would you stand up, Elijah? Great job fighting for taxpayers in Missouri. And I'll tell you, letting the American people keep more of what they earn works. You think about the results of our tax cuts, all of this agenda, it's really been extraordinary to watch. And here in Missouri and all across this country, the economy is booming. Since Election Day 2016, businesses large and small have created nearly 3.7 million new jobs all across America, including 46,000 jobs right here in the Show Me State, with 16,000 in St. Louis alone. It's happening. The gateway city's unemployment rate hasn't reached lows at this number since the year 2000. And the President and I are especially proud of the fact, because of the policies that we're here to celebrate today, we have now seen the lowest unemployment rate ever recorded for Hispanic Americans and African Americans. The American dream is working again for every American. And when it comes to manufacturing, the heart and soul of the heartland of this country, new factories are opening up all across the country. Old mills are coming back to life. The greatest workers in the world are getting back on the job. You know, 3 years ago, under the last administration, the steel plant across the river in Granite City shut down. You all remember that, after more than a century of operation. But thanks to the president that you supported and the Congress that has supported him, that steel mill is reopening, and it's rehiring 800 workers going back to work. Steel is back, and America is back. In fact, when we talk about manufacturing, you'll see on the news tonight, the President's taken decisive action again today to make sure that American workers have the training and the education that they need to meet the jobs of the future. The President and I both believe that all honest work is honorable. And the President will sign today an executive order that sets into motion a council for American workers that'll put vocational education back at the center of the American economy and of American education. And we need it. The truth is today, there are more job openings in America than there are people looking for jobs in America today. So we're going to make sure that the American people have an opportunity to get the skills and the training to meet those new jobs and opportunities. But you know, since the President signed our tax cuts into law, there's one other piece that came along that was what we called a pleasant surprise. More than 6 million Americans have already received bonuses, pay raises, or bigger benefits following the Trump tax cut, including 46,000 people all across the state of Missouri. True. The President actually heard from some of y'all firsthand when he was here earlier this year. The Central Bank of St. Louis gave bonuses of up to 1,000, more than 2,500 workers. Hartman and Company, a small highway construction firm, gave a week's extra vacation to its workers and $2,500 in bonuses. And Walmart alone gave out nearly $15 million in bonuses to all of its workers in the Show Me State. Let's hear it for these companies that have been supporting our workers. Now, I think that's great news, but, you know, not everybody agrees. I mean, it's true. I mean, $1,000, $2,500, unexpected at the end of the year. That to me is like a really good thing. But you might have heard that the person that wants to be Speaker of the House again, Nancy Pelosi, she actually said that a $1,000 bonus for working Americans after the Trump tax cuts were passed was, in her words, nothing more than crumbs. Remember? Now, I'd like to remind you, I come from what I call the Joseph A. Banks wing of the West Wing of the White House, right? I mean, Karen and I have lived on a budget every day of our 33-year marriage. We really have. I still do. And the truth is, when our kids were little, just growing up, we had a term for another $1,000 in my paycheck right before, at the end of the year. Christmas, right? Anybody with me on that? That's another trip to Toys R Us. Let me say very seriously, though. Any leader who says $1,000 in the pockets of working Americans is crumbs is out of touch with the American people and should never lead the American Congress again. I mean, I don't know about the rest of you. I don't know if you remember the last time liberals ran the Congress of the United States, but I do. I was there. I was a member of Congress. I mean, I saw them run the Congress, and they nearly ran the American economy into the ground. Instead of cutting taxes, they raised taxes. Instead of increasing military spending, they cut military spending. They tried to pass cap and trade. They gave us the nightmare of Obamacare. They essentially gave us an economy that would barely budge. The most powerful economy in the history of the world during the 8 years of the last administration grew by less than 2 percentage points. And wages were stagnant as a result. Today, nearly a decade later, the truth is Democrats in Washington have even become more liberal than they were back then. And frankly, you only need to look at Missouri Senator Claire McCaskill for proof. I mean, Claire McCaskill has voted in near lockstep with the far wing of her party. And while she claims to be a moderate, she actually votes like Bernie Sanders. I mean, the truth is, when the time came to cut your taxes, Claire McCaskill voted no. When the time came to cut taxes on your businesses, large and small, across Missouri, in the city and on the farm, Claire McCaskill voted no. But it's not just tax cuts. When the time came to repeal and replace Obamacare, to defund sanctuary cities, even when we empowered Missouri to protect the unborn and defund Planned Parenthood, Claire McCaskill voted no. Every single time. In fact, when the president's first nominee to the Supreme Court came before the Senate last year, Claire McCaskill voted with Chuck Schumer and against Justice Neil Gorsuch. Well, we've got a new nominee going up for the Senate now. And let me be clear. Judge Brett Kavanaugh is a remarkable jurist and a man of integrity with an impeccable record who deserves a seat on the Supreme Court of the United States. As his record reflects, Judge Kavanaugh will interpret the Constitution as written. He won't legislate from the bench. He has a proven record of commitment to limited government, to the Second Amendment, and to religious liberty. And so today, standing here in Missouri, I want to call on Claire McCaskill to set politics aside. Give Judge Kavanaugh a fair hearing and give him the support he deserves. And Missouri, if Claire won't vote to confirm a judge like Brett Kavanaugh, you need to give Missouri a senator who will. While liberals in Washington like Claire McCaskill have been voting no, I'm pleased to report to you that your Republican leaders have been voting yes every step of the way, putting Missouri first, putting America first, and standing with this president. Now, they couldn't be here today because the Congress is in session, but I still want to take a moment to thank them all. You know, I served in Congress with him when he was in the House of Representatives, but I got to tell you, the president and I couldn't be more grateful for the strong, conservative leadership and unwavering support of Senator Roy Blunt. He's great. We're also grateful for members of the House from this great state. Congresswoman Ann Wagner and Congressman Jason Smith have stood strong for our military, for our tax cuts, and for the values that make this country great. I'd also like to recognize a leader from right across the river who's been standing up for American steel workers, coal miners, and our nation's great veterans. Join me in thanking Congressman Mike Bost, will you, from over in Illinois. He's a real star, and he's a champion. These leaders deserve your gratitude and thanks. And for that matter, so does your great Attorney General, Josh Hawley. You know, I've had the privilege to get to know this man over the last year, but I knew his record and his reputation long before I met him. And I got to tell you, Josh Hawley is just as good as they come. He's a son of Missouri, a principled conservative with a record of defending our Constitution to the very highest levels of our courts. He's argued cases before the Supreme Court of the United States itself, and he's been a champion, as you just heard, in those passionate remarks for all the causes that we hold dear. He's been a great leader here in the Show Me State already. But I got to tell you, I sure do hope Missouri finds another opportunity for Josh Hawley to serve the American people come this November. But as I close, I want to thank you again for being here. Been a busy week for all of us, but you're awful kind to come out in the middle of an afternoon. But I hope you didn't just come here today to hear some speeches. Hope you didn't just come here today to shake a hand, although I look forward to sticking around for a while and meeting as many of you as I can. I hope you leave here today with a little bit of a burden on your heart of whatever you've done before to go and to do more. I want you to leave here today. I want you to leave here today and recognize that this is a challenging time in the life of our nation. And all of us need to let our voices be heard. The truth is, this is a year when you got to exercise all your rights as citizens. And more important than anything else in my mind, or maybe more important than one other thing, is you got to go tell the story. All right? Tell the story of American renewal. And tell your neighbors and your friends and your coworkers, people at your work, at your worship. Just pull them aside and say, you know, I was in St. Louis the other day and I ran into Mike. And it took him like a half hour just to list the top lines of everything President Trump has accomplished for this country. And just go tell it. Seriously. I mean, I'll always believe that all the TV shows in the world, all the talking heads on television in the morning, all the commercials, all the radio ads in the mail are not ever to be compared to when someone who knows you and trusts you and puts confidence in you hears from you about what you believe is important. And so I want you to go out and tell somebody, not just what you heard today, but what you've seen every day since Election Day in 2016. I mean, literally, as I said, outside the grocery store, outside your house of worship, just over a backyard fence. I mean, I think that's where the real difference is made. I think in many ways, when I look back at 2016 and I think of days just like today when the President and I were on the campaign trail, I know that it was millions of Americans out there talking to one another about how we could make this country prosperous and strong again. I mean, you need to go out and tell your friends. Tell your friends what's happening in the country today. Tell them what they're not hearing on most of their cable news networks about the progress that we're making. Like, here's one. Tell them we cut their taxes, all right? So they can keep more of what they earn. I mean, tell them we're restoring American strength at home and abroad. We're supporting our military again to protect our nation and our families and our freedom. Go tell them. I mean, just tell them we're putting Washington back to work for them, not the other way around. Just tell them under President Donald Trump, the forgotten men and women of America are forgotten no more. You go tell them, Missouri. And in these times of too much division in these United States, I'd encourage you to do one more thing. You know, it seems like every time you turn on the television, people are amplifying and emphasizing the disagreements among the American people. So I think it's a really good time for us to turn to a wellspring of American strength throughout our history. And I would say to each and every one of you, if you're of a mind to bow the head and bend the knee and pray for America, now's a good time to do it. I really believe it. And while I'm here today to talk about the agenda we've advanced, I'm proud to stand with this president and everybody who stood with us, past, present, and future. When I talk about this, I rather like what Abraham Lincoln said one time, that this isn't so much about one side or the other. He was asked in a much more challenging time in the life of our nation. Our 16th president was asked if he thought that God was on his side. And President Lincoln said, "You know, I don't concern myself so much with whether God is on our side as I do with whether we're on God's side." So pray for America. Pray for all of the American people, because prayer matters in this one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I truly do believe those ancient words that if his people who are called by his name will humble themselves and pray, he'll do like he's always done. Through much more challenging times, through the long and storied history of this country, he'll hear from heaven and he'll heal this land. So pray for America. Well, thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity to be with you. I look forward to meeting as many of you as time allows. I leave here today with renewed confidence. I really do. With your continued support all across the state of Missouri. With your great conservative leaders at the national level and at the state level, past, present, and future. With President Donald Trump in the White House, and with God's help, we will make America prosperous again. We will make America safe again. And to borrow a phrase, we will make America great again. Thank you all very much. God bless you. God bless Missouri, and God bless the United States of America.
All right, guys. Well, that was Vice President Pence keynoting those remarks. I'm getting taped in the back here in St. Louis, Missouri, there to talk at an America First rally about tax cuts. But meanwhile, senators are on the Senate floor debating President Trump and his remarks, a la his remarks with Vladimir Putin the other day in Helsinki. We also have some other House Democrats talking about their new act to combat Russian interference in the election. So a lot of stuff kind of happening, transpiring from President Trump after that whole sort of debacle this week. Let me show you, though, some of the top stories of this week before we jump back over to Capitol Hill here in D.C.
It was really shocking. Neighbors inside this Fort Lauderdale neighborhood stunned, they say, after the arrest of a woman accused of beating her own mother to death last week. According to police, 52-year-old Gabriela Pereiro says she attacked her 85-year-old mother for leaving her out of her will. Police say Pereiro told them, "I pushed her down, grabbed her, and tore the skin off her arm," and went on to say, "You destroyed my life, so I'm going to destroy you." Then Monday, when Pereiro appeared before a judge, she nearly confessed to the crime on camera.
All right, ma'am, you have a charge, it's an add charge of premeditated murder.
It wasn't premeditated, but
Okay,
I did
ma'am.
murder.
Don't discuss.
Before her attorney stopped her, and the judge issued a warning.
Don't
You have
discuss
the right to
the
remain
facts of the
silent.
case.
Anything you say can and will be used against you.
Back in the quiet neighborhood where Pereiro lived with her mother, the disbelief remains.
We were all shocked. Everybody was really terrified of what happened. We never expected that to happen here.
58 killed, hundreds injured. Now come the lawsuits, not just from victims, but also from MGM Resorts, which is launching a preemptive legal attack, hoping to shield itself from liability, stemming from a failure to stop gunman Stephen Paddock and his nearly 24 weapons.
How deep in the swamp does MGM want to jump? How low do they want to kick victims like myself and other survivors?
A PR nightmare, perhaps, but the casino hopes a brilliant legal strategy. MGM is filing its case in federal court, claiming a law known as the Safety Act shields the company. MGM lawyers argue the law precludes any finding of liability against plaintiffs for any claim for injuries arising out of or related to Paddock's mass attack. Plaintiffs have no liability of any kind to defendants. Lawyers for the victims disagree.
It wasn't meant to provide immunity for a hotel casino who had woefully inefficient security process that didn't, all the bells and whistles that were going off that they didn't catch.
MGM claims because the concert security vendor was certified by the Department of Homeland Security against terrorism or acts of mass destruction, it is not liable. But neither the sheriff nor the FBI classified the shooting as terrorism.
Even if a judge somehow says this was terrorism and the Safety Act applies, they have to prove that the security system they had in place was effective.
MGM claims that Congress, after 9/11, stipulated that all litigation related to mass violence belongs in federal court. Victims prefer state court, which is considered more friendly to their claims that MGM was negligent in providing security. In Los Angeles, William Lajeunesse, Fox News.
One down here, I remember that one, and there was one there, but I don't know where the other ones were.
Squamous cell skin cancer tumors once covered her right leg, but things are much different for Mrs. McKenzie. The University of Miami Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center sharing pictures and video of her remarkable story.
There's nothing to show for them now.
McKenzie smiling now, but treatment for her tumor seemed bleak just 2 years ago.
She was not a candidate for surgery because of the sheer number and size of her tumors. She wasn't a candidate for radiotherapy, again, for the same reasons.
Back in 2017, Dr. Anna Nichols, a dermatologist at the Cancer Center, released a case report she thought might help. It showed the HPV vaccine Gardasil reduce skin cancer growth in 2 patients. So her team decided to take a chance on the off-label treatment.
I think we had a really reasonable expectation and good data that this was actually going to, at the very least, do no harm to this patient, at the very least, and possibly provide some benefit.
First, she was given 2 doses of the vaccine in her arm. Then a few weeks later, it was injected directly into several of her tumors, when doctors began noticing a change.
All of her tumors completely resolved about 11 months after the first direct tumor injection. And she has no recurrence. It's been about 24 months now since we started with the treatment.
They decided to try it and it worked. It just killed them all off.
Mrs. McKenzie and her son now looking forward to celebrating her 100th birthday this fall.
Just like they were never there. It was just amazing, the recovery.
On 19 March 2017, RTD passenger Sam Hines attempted to disembark with his bicycle the train at the Colfax and Auraria station when something went very wrong. He was dragged by the train and sustained spine and rib injuries. He also broke his arm. Hines has hired an attorney and is pursuing legal action. The accident was 16 months ago. Problem solvers wanted to know exactly what is RTD's current safety protocols for boarding and exiting trains.
The operator will open the window and take a look down the station platform to make sure it's all clear. And our officer will will also confirm with sometimes a thumbs up out the door.
Gates, lights, bells, and bright yellow tactile warning strips were already in place at the time of the accident. RTD will not comment on this incident in particular, but they do offer this advice to all passengers.
We are asking the public and the communities around our system to be sure that they understand what it is they could be doing to be safe around our system, what to look out for, and most importantly, not to become too distracted with everyday devices.
Two, one.
Earlier this month, sources close to Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos' rocket company Blue Origin revealed adventure seekers will be able to take an out-of-this-world trip to space aboard the New Shepard rocket for about $200,000 to $300,000. For space tourists, the vehicle will carry 6 passengers and blast off vertically, shooting more than 62 miles above Earth into suborbital space. Passengers will be able to experience weightlessness and get a breathtaking view of the curve of the Earth before the capsule makes a vertical landing back on the ground.
Go, baby, go. A beautiful liftoff of our New Shepard rocket here from West Texas.
But before the company launches Earthlings, it's conducting several safety test flights with only one passenger, a test dummy named Mannequin Skywalker.
We're going to make it as safe as we can make it. We're going to test it. We're not going to take any shortcuts.
But on Wednesday, the 9th of such scheduled tests blasted off and flew higher into space than ever before, reaching 74 miles above the Earth. The entire round-trip flight taking only 11 minutes.
And touchdown. Absolutely beautiful. Welcome home, New Shepard.
Blue Origin is just one of a handful of companies working to launch unmanned rockets, carrying cargo and humans into space. They plan to start selling tickets for their galactic getaways next year. In New York, Jackie Ibanez, Fox News.
Shift change at the UC Berkeley Police Department. Daytime officers relieved by overnight cops working 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. This couch in a campus library not considered part of their patrol duties, but the investigation found this small lounge in the math hall became a regular overnight hangout for a half-dozen officers.
But once you lie about it, you lose all credibility.
Matt Meredith was a City of Berkeley police officer for 30 years.
Over the years, there's times where cops need to take a nap, and usually a buddy's there watching them doing paperwork, and if there's a call, someone can go out. But what gets you in trouble is when you're dishonest.
The 6 unnamed officers were found to be dishonest, even with multiple cameras to capture their comings and goings after the library closed for the night.
I think we all sleep everywhere in this campus.
Some students tend towards sympathy. Then they learn the officers were on duty and routinely radioed in, claiming they were checking on other campus buildings when they were actually kicking back. Students note those overnight hours are when the campus is most dangerous.
Just the other night, I heard someone through the window, before I went to sleep, saying yelling for help because he was getting robbed. And I think they shouldn't be sleeping on the job or just hanging around at the library for that matter.
The decision to terminate was made by Chief Margot Bennett and upheld by a hearing officer. The investigation is said to involve a sting operation with a hidden camera and microphone in the library.
Having persons on the payroll that are proven to be dishonest, I don't know. I mean, where does it end? How far are they willing to go in their dishonesty?
And that's the crux of it, say law enforcement observers. While it's hard to lose a sixth of the force,
everybody's short here in the Bay Area for law enforcement, and so when all of a sudden you lose a group of people, it's a huge hit.
It's also an impossible situation, putting an officer with tainted credibility on the witness stand.
If you lie for that, you lie for something else. So again, any kind of cases could be jeopardized. It's a great paying job with great benefits, and when you make a mistake like this, you've screwed your career.
Please watch your speed regardless of trying to get home.
Arizona State Representative Paul Mosley might have a bit of a lead foot.
97 is absolutely not an
This stunning encounter with authorities from the spring went viral last week, but it raises a big question. How often does Mosley use the idea of legislative immunity to get out of a speeding ticket? Police records show that Mosley has been pulled over 7 times in just the last 18 months as a state lawmaker. February of last year, speeding in a no-passing zone. April of last year, a stop sign violation. Just 9 days after that, the same officer stops Mosley for going 17 miles over the speed limit. All warnings.
Yeah, I mean, I don't break the law because I can, but because
But this spring is when Mosley put the rubber to the road. March 18th, 71 miles an hour in a 55. 9 days later, this video was taken.
You were driving 130 earlier, you said?
Yeah, I go 130, 140, 120. Yeah, I'd come down I was going 120 almost. You know, there was no traffic.
And then on April 5th, Mosley was stopped for going 81 in a 55. And sure enough, less than 2 hours later, he was stopped again, this time going 33 miles over the speed limit.
Many dog owners get the same advice.
He's supposed to be on a grain-free diet.
But now the FDA has a warning about some of those grain-free foods.
So the FDA has come out with a warning on grain-free foods that contain peas, legumes, lentils, and potato as a protein source in the foods. And it's because of a taurine deficiency.
Deb Dempsey at Mouthfuls Pet Supply in Denver says her staff is already getting questions about this.
And our entire staff has been well versed in this.
The condition is dilated cardiomyopathy, or DCM, and it can cause fatal heart failure. Some reported symptoms include decreased energy, cough, difficulty breathing, and episodes of collapse. No specific brands are named in the warning, but pet owners can check the ingredient lists on food. As for Deb's advice,
we suggest rotation. Rotate between brands, rotate between protein levels or proteins, add in real food.
Here's a tip. Deb says that 1 sardine a week or a splash of goat's milk every day should be enough to supplement taurine. While some pet parents are getting back to basics.
I feed him a raw diet. It's what they'd eat in the wild.
Veterinarians tell us you can talk to your vet about the best diet fitted to your pet for age, breed, condition, and sex. Kim Posey, Channel 2 News.
Some up-and-comers are here right alongside the biggest names in tech. All are showing off their wares in the town they call home.
What you see around us in the plaza and in the street is going on every day in Mountain View, but most people only see a piece of it.
And so Mountain View created this showcase, a way for people to see more. Oculus showed off virtual reality. Waymo brought a self-driving van, and NASA had some fungus they're using to make building materials for space. And that was just the beginning.
We brought my passion project, which is the GeoBlade.
The folks at Hoverboard brought their one-wheeled electric skateboard.
Like if I want to go that way, I'll just lean and keep leaning. And then I tilt it to turn.
There was technology to make pizza delivery better and to put telescopes on planes and lots of things to ride.
The idea is for people to actually interact with the technology, to hop in a self-driving car or get on an electric bike.
Are you developing things like... For the companies, it was a chance to meet the public and each other. DD, a smart transportation company, just opened their Mountain View office in November.
And it's a good chance for us to engage with the community, engage with city leaders, and get to know who our peers are in this, industry.
And residents call the showcase eye-opening. They say they can't believe the concentration of innovation that's here.
Actually, I'm really proud that it's in Mountain View because we're like the hub of technology, and it's awesome to see all this in my backyard.
In Mountain View, Ann Rubin, KTVU Fox 2 News.
A Jaeger, there's a Gorilla Glue, and a sour diesel. This one here is a Red Dragon. I've never grown it before, so I'm not sure how it's going to turn out.
Jerry Cush didn't always grow and harvest marijuana in his own backyard.
Not budding or blooming yet.
The current Oregon resident,
Most of the strains I'm growing this year are kind of new.
used to call Idaho home.
It'll get more so once they get ready to harvest.
Like many, Cush has a handful of conditions requiring medical care: stomach issues, fibromyalgia, and the need for antacids and antidepressants.
You'd take sometimes 2 or 3 prescriptions just to fight the side effects of the morphine. And then you have side effects from some of these medications, and some of them can ruin your life.
On that list of meds, a high daily dose of morphine or Oxycontin to treat chronic pain.
And they kept increasing it. I was taking 90 milligrams of morphine 3 times a day.
The morphine ended up morphing Cush into an antisocial version of himself he didn't want to be.
A lot of times lethargic, didn't want to do anything.
So in 2014, after 25 years of use, Cush decided he'd had enough.
I don't like taking pills. I was determined I was going to come off of it.
Over the course of 6 months, Cush was successfully able to slowly decrease the morphine and increase the marijuana.
Basically, marijuana's been the best for me all along.
But while living in Idaho, Cush says medicating with marijuana became stressful, constantly in fear of being arrested and sent to jail.
It got to where I was kind of paranoid to go anywhere, to do anything.
So he made the monumental decision to move to Oregon.
It was hard because I was farther away from my family. It didn't see them as often.
But Cush says the change in physical well-being was well worth it, saying the benefits of marijuana far outweigh the complications he came to expect with multiple prescription pills.
The only thing I take for pain is marijuana. This way I know what goes on my medicine.
With a doctor's note and a grow permit from the state, he's now just one more Oregon resident legally growing his own pain meds on his own property. And without the pot,
I know it would be very difficult to live with the things that I've got, without it. Yeah, in actuality, each little
long, stressful.
By the time he gets out of the University of Minnesota Medical Center next week, it'll be nearly half a year
February 9th.
of living in a hospital room.
Waited about 4.5 months for heart.
26-year-old Jaron Winings got a new heart on June 23rd, and we've told this story before.
It was scary.
What was scary?
Getting a new heart.
In the fall of 1999, I interviewed him when he was 8, in need of his first transplant, and then again a few months later after he got home. Last fall, he learned that original heart was failing. It was time for a second transplant, and in February, at the top of the list, he checked in to wait.
When he first came in, I'm only going to give them a week. And then it was pretty soon, I'm going to give him 2 weeks, and we got 3 weeks out of him, and then it was 3 months, that's it, I'm done.
But Jaron kept waiting until June 23rd, and his recovery has been a battle.
It's been very rough. I don't remember much after.
Considering this is Jaron's morning walk now, it's pretty remarkable, knowing that 5 days after surgery, complications put him into a 9-day induced coma. And this entire time, now pushing 6 months, his family stayed at the nearby Ronald McDonald House. It's where they stayed when Jaron was 8, and they welcomed them back with open arms, even though he's now an adult.
They didn't hesitate. That's what they told her. Once a family's always a family.
A long time to wait and a tough recovery. Going home soon, and he shouldn't have to do this again.
Hopefully I won't.
This is it.
This is it.
You knew getting the first one that...
This is most unusual. Most unusual.
When you hear of a shark attack, you probably think of the California coastline or the waters off Florida. But no, this is New York's Long Island.
This was an incredibly unusual situation, to say the least.
Officials now investigating 2 attacks off Fire Island.
I kind of thought it was a dream. I didn't really think it was actually happening.
12-year-old Lola Polina, one of 2 children, rushed to the hospital. Polina suffering from a bite to the leg, while a tooth was found lodged in the leg of a young boy after a shark allegedly took a bite out of him.
This boy just ended up falling off his boogie board in the wrong place. And most of the shark bites that happen are hit and runs.
With the evidence left behind in the young boy's leg, experts believe he was bitten by a shark. They're still investigating what attacked Lola Polina, but her father says the incident was surreal.
I couldn't process what was going on at first. You're watching this happen. It's not computing until I saw her come out, and then it started to like, holy, I can't believe it just happened.
Both kids are expected to be okay, and while shark attacks are more common here on the West Coast, the number is still low. On average, there are only 16 attacks a year. In Los Angeles, Jonathan Hunt, Fox News.
We're breaking down.
All right, guys. Well, back in the newsroom, those were some of our top stories of the day. We're glad you're here with us and along with us for the stream, the live stream today inside our newsroom. Kind of a quiet day inside our offices here, but we're throwing it over to Capitol Hill because the Senate floor continues to debate Russian interference and this new act that some of the lawmakers are proposing to combat interference with the administration and the executive branch with Russia. And so a bunch of them are kind of speaking out on that this morning. And we're going to go over there because that is live right now. Other than that, gorgeous day here in the city. Here's a live look at the White House. Beautiful sunny day here in DC and not too humid. I know they were saying that it was going to be kind of a gorgeous couple of days here. So we're getting a good summer in the city for at least a few days. Over in Capitol Hill, let's take a look inside the Senate chambers where they're continuing to debate this matter. Take a listen.
On an issue, and now I'd like to talk about another issue that I'd like for the members of Congress to come together on, and it's called the Keeping Families Together and Enforce the Law Act. You've heard a lot of reports recently about children being separated from their families at the border, and the administration has taken a position in part prompted by lawsuits. And we can debate whether or not the administration should fix this problem through an executive order. But how about this? Why doesn't Congress act to provide long-term certainty through an act of Congress to make absolutely certain that children who cross the borders with their families can be kept with their families while we're trying to determine in a court whether or not that family has a legitimate claim to asylum? It sounds fairly simple. In fact, it is pretty simple. I met with Senators Feinstein and Senator Durbin and Senator Cruz. We sat down and we discussed a way to actually get this into law. We all agreed that it needed to be very narrowly focused. The problem with immigration around here and the immigration subject is it grows really big and really complex really quickly. And what happens with big and complex on Capitol Hill is nothing gets done. So the bill that we proposed is very simple. Fix the issues in the law, clarify the process so that we can actually make absolutely certain that minor children can stay with their parents while their asylum claims are being considered. We've got agreement on virtually everything. We've agreed that families should be kept together. We've agreed that we need more judges so we can reduce the backlog. We've agreed that we need more attorneys to participate in the process, basically 2-to-1 ratio between a new judge and new attorneys to support the legal process. We agreed on minimum standards for housing so that we make sure that we're keeping these families in a place that we think are appropriate. Now, some people may come to the floor and say we're going to stand up tent cities and subject people to harsh conditions. We don't want to do that. As a matter of fact, we feel so strongly about it, we're putting forth specific requirements for housing. So we're addressing the judge constraint. We're addressing the lawyer constraint. We're addressing specific standards for keeping families together. And we could actually pass this in a heartbeat. We could do it on the Senate floor. We could do it through what's called unanimous consent. Allow somebody to come down here, put a bill forth, vote on it, get it passed. Get those children and get those parents certainty. Now, the fact of the matter is some of them are going to apply for asylum. They won't have a legitimate case. Others will. But we proposed a bill that would prevent any sort of lengthy detention. As a matter of fact, if this bill gets passed, the average case with a family, which would be prioritized, if you have asylum requests and you're with children, We want to keep you together and get that at the front of the docket so that you can get certainty fairly quickly, over about 40 to 60 days. But we have a constraint that we've got to get past. And it has to do with a law or a court ruling calling the Flores case, where if we don't narrowly tailor the language to say, if a minor comes across the border with their parents, then they will be allowed to be kept with their parents in appropriate housing until such time as their asylum request has been heard before a court of law. It's not getting rid of Flores. You have some people here saying we just want to completely eliminate that case. Absolutely not the case. We don't want children who come across the border who don't have parents with them to be detained in perpetuity or indefinite detention, as it's referred to down here. That's what Flores does. So if a child comes across the border and they don't have a parent with them, then after 20 days, they have to be placed somewhere other than detention. That's a good policy. But if you have a situation where if you let Flores stand the way that it is, then the law specifically requires the child to be separated from the parents. This gives the parents the choice. If they want the children with them while they're going through the legal process, then they can have that. If they choose to have the child placed with a family member or a guardian, then they can have that too. One of the things that I think we have to talk more about is the danger of just randomly placing children with a parent or guardian that comes across the border. We have several cases where in our system, there is no way we would place the parent with some of the people they're coming across the border with. They've been convicted for a variety of things. Child neglect, child abuse, drug trafficking, all the sorts of things that would have an American citizen's child removed from their family are the same sort of standards that we want for a child coming across the border. And of course, we want to make sure that that person who says that they're their parent or their guardian really is. So, Mr. President, you know, in this body, there are a few opportunities where you can narrowly tailor a policy to a point to where only the most partisan or unreasonable person wouldn't support it. This is one of them. We can get this bill passed, sent to the President's desk, and provide certainty, a compassionate, appropriate method for dealing with what are now hundreds or thousands of people who have come across the border, children, with their parents, treat them fairly, treat them justly, and have them processed in what I believe is the greatest judicial system that's ever existed. It's on us to solve this problem. And anybody who comes down here and says, well, no, I've got to talk about DACA, which is something I support, a path to citizenship, or I want to talk about border security, which I also support. Yeah, let's talk about that, but let's not hold these children and these families hostage for other immigration matters that this body should have the backbone to deal with the political challenges that may come from their own party and do the right thing the next time. This time, let's solve the separation of children from their parents. Let's stop playing the political games that make for great fodder, but they're not compassionate. They're not a part of the solution. I hope we have enough members to become a part of the solution. And next week, we'll be talking more about this and possibly even through unanimous consent. I want somebody to come down to this floor and explain to me why this is a bad idea. I want them to explain it to the American people. But out of respect for the Senate, we won't offer unanimous consent today, but you can be pretty sure we will next week. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President.
Senator from North Carolina.
I have 7 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and majority leaders.
Duly
majority
noted.
and minority leaders.
Duly noted.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
ICE is responsible to protect the sovereignty of this country.
It's been a tough few weeks for the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency known as ICE. Now, defenders of the embattled government agency, including its recently departed leader, are fighting back.
I've never met a bigger bunch of patriots, hardworking people that are dedicated to protecting this country.
Though barely 15 years in existence, this government agency now faces an existential crisis. Congress created ICE in 2003 as a direct response to the tragic events of 9/11 and gave the agency a unique double mandate: protect U.S. national security interests abroad and the public safety of Americans here at home. It has wide-ranging authority, but its primary mission is to enforce federal laws governing the U.S. border, customs, trade, and immigration. In a nutshell, ICE keeps the bad guys out.
On average, we stop 10 known or suspected terrorists per day from coming into the United States. And that's primarily the function of ICE and TSA working together. Today,
ICE has over 20,000 people who work in 400 offices in the U.S. and around the world, and an annual budget of approximately $6 billion. Now, lawmakers who oversee the agency and support its mission want the American people to know ICE is well worth the price tag.
They stop these human traffickers exploiting children, drug smugglers also.
In 2017 alone, ICE seized almost 1 million pounds of narcotics, including the deadly drugs heroin and fentanyl continuing to fuel the opioid crisis. Also last year, ICE arrested 143,000 criminal aliens they claim are responsible for 11,000 weapons offenses, 5,000 sexual assault offenses, 2,000 kidnapping offenses, and 1,800 homicide offenses. While many Democratic lawmakers may no longer see the utility of ICE, the majority of the American people do. A recent Fox News poll finds by a margin greater than 2-1, American voters are against disbanding the agency. In Washington, Jillian Turner, Fox News.
Busloads of parents have started arriving at the Annunciation House in El Paso. It's one of 4 locations around the country identified by the federal government to assist the migrant families once they're reunited with their children and released from ICE custody.
So the government is centralizing the release process.
Garcia says volunteers are working around the clock, from helping families locate housing or medical services to linking them up with immigration lawyers, since they'll have future court dates.
The pace of releases will increase dramatically in the next couple of days, to where we may be looking at as many as 100 individuals, 50 families per day that will come to us.
HHS says all but 71 of the 2,551 separated children ages 5 to 17 do have a parental match. However, the government will not disclose how many reunions have already taken place ahead of next Thursday's deadline.
Illegal entry doesn't disqualify you from getting your child back.
This as new battles continue in court. A federal judge this week temporarily halted the deportations of migrant families once they're reunited. The ruling was in response to a brief filed by the ACLU, which cited growing rumors of mass deportations being carried out immediately after the reunification.
We will have at least a week in which those families can consult about their options and decide what to do.
A lawyer with the U.S. Department of Justice expressed opposition to the week-long suspension of deportations, but did not address whether the rumors of mass deportations were in fact true. In Dallas, Casey Stiegel, Fox News.
Lava from Kilauea volcano has always attracted visitors who wanted to see the show in person. Mayor Kim says that Monday's lava bomb that hit the tour boat shows just how unpredictable lava viewing can be. So all safety measures had to be considered before a lava viewing area can be approved on land, which is done by the State Department of Health and the U.S. Geological Survey.
If you address the other things of safety, then that takes care of the liability. The liability comes into play when you disregard certain things and people get hurt, obviously, because you have to go with the numbers game.
Mayor Kim tells me viewers will have to be brought in either by bus or shuttle, so there wouldn't be a lot of traffic, and it wouldn't be an area where people can walk around in. The county would only charge for the cost of the operation. The idea is to help the businesses that have been devastated by this latest eruption.
Every business, I think, in the area of Volcano down to Pahoa area have lost businesses from 20 to 80%. And anything can help, and naturally that's our job. So we're going to try to keep looking for things. Hopefully things will stabilize a little better.
He adds that there was an area picked out on Pohoiki Road that was all cleared out and ready to go, but a cinder cone built up which blocked the viewing area.
Lo and behold, when it was ready to be planted to be the area, the cone became so tall that you couldn't even see the eruption.
So other areas are now being considered, and a site could be picked within a matter of days, if not weeks.
A fourth body found in the wreckage Wednesday morning. Recovery crews getting to work as the sun came up to search for the missing person who went down with 3 others when the 2 small planes collided above the Everglades Tuesday afternoon.
That fourth body has been identified as Carlos Alfredo Zanetti Scarpati. He's a 22-year-old white male. We have spoken to the family. The family was on scene, and again, it's heartbreaking.
The FAA says it was a Piper PA-34 and a Cessna 172, both believed to be flight training. The killer collision sparking a swift multi-agency response.
We were out here training with our airboat, and once we received the call, we were able to immediately respond to the area.
Debris raining down from the sky.
Look at all the pieces falling.
Captured on cell phone video by a man fishing in the Everglades at the time.
Holy bro, plane just fell.
Poor people. They probably died on impact.
No survivors. Among the 4 people dead, 19-year-old Nija Sigwal, a pilot, as well as 22-year-old George Sanchez and 72-year-old Ralph Knight. The planes said to be from the same place, Dean International. It's the flight school that's had its share of mid-air problems, including an Everglades crash last May in which both on board survived. There were also 2 July crashes last year, with one of those resulting in the death of a pilot.
That's something that the FAA is going to have to look at along with NTSB as far as the school itself. The Miami-Dade Police Department, of course, our main focus is going to be the death investigation.
Shock. It was really shocking.
Neighbors inside this Fort Lauderdale neighborhood stunned, they say, after the arrest of a woman accused of beating her own mother to death last week. According to police, 52-year-old Gabriela Pereiro says she attacked her 85-year-old mother for leaving her out of her will. Police say Pereiro told them, "I pushed her down, grabbed her, and tore the skin off her arm," and went on to say, "You destroyed my life, so I'm going to destroy you." Then Monday, when Pereiro appeared before a judge, she nearly confessed to the crime on camera.
All right, ma'am, you have a charge. It's an add charge of premeditated murder.
It wasn't premeditated, but I did murder.
Gabriela, don't discuss.
Before her attorney stopped her and the judge issued a warning.
Don't
You have
discuss
the right to
the
remain
facts of the
silent.
case.
Anything you say can and will be used against you.
Back in the quiet neighborhood where Pereiro lived with her mother, the disbelief remains.
We were all shocked. Everybody was really terrified of what happened. We never expected that to happen here.
58 killed, hundreds injured. Now come the lawsuits, not just from victims, but also from MGM Resorts, which is launching a preemptive legal attack, hoping to shield itself from liability, stemming from a failure to stop gunman Stephen Paddock and his nearly 24 weapons.
How deep in the swamp does MGM want to jump? How low do they want to kick victims like myself and other survivors?
A PR nightmare, perhaps, but the casino hopes a brilliant legal strategy. MGM is filing its case in federal court, claiming a law known as the Safety Act shields the company. MGM lawyers argue the law precludes any finding of liability against plaintiffs for any claim for injuries arising out of or related to Paddock's mass attack. Plaintiffs have no liability of any kind to defendants. Lawyers for the victims disagree.
It wasn't meant to provide immunity for a hotel casino who had woefully inefficient security process that didn't, all the bells and whistles that were going off that they didn't catch.
MGM claims because the concert security vendor was certified by the Department of Homeland Security against terrorism or acts of mass destruction, it is not liable. But neither the sheriff nor the FBI classified the shooting as terrorism.
Even if a judge somehow says this was terrorism and the Safety Act applies, they have to prove that the security system they had in place was effective.
MGM claims that Congress, after 9/11, stipulated that all litigation related to mass violence belongs in federal court. Victims prefer state court, which is considered more friendly to their claims that MGM was negligent in providing security. In Los Angeles, William Lajeunesse, Fox News.
One down here, I remember that one, and there was one there, but I don't know where the other ones were.
Squamous cell skin cancer tumors once covered her right leg, but things are much different for Mrs. McKenzie. The University of Miami Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center sharing pictures and video of her remarkable story.
There's nothing to show for them now.
McKenzie smiling now, but treatment for her tumor seemed bleak just 2 years ago.
She was not a candidate for surgery because of the sheer number and size of her tumors. She wasn't a candidate for radiotherapy, again, for the same reasons.
Back in 2017, Dr. Anna Nichols, a dermatologist at the Cancer Center, released a case report she thought might help. It showed the HPV vaccine Gardasil reduce skin cancer growth in 2 patients. So her team decided to take a chance on the off-label treatment.
I think we had a really reasonable expectation and good data that this was actually going to, at the very least, do no harm to this patient, at the very least, and possibly provide some benefit.
First, she was given 2 doses of the vaccine in her arm. Then a few weeks later, it was injected directly into several of her tumors, when doctors began noticing a change.
All of her tumors completely resolved about 11 months after the first direct tumor injection. And she has no recurrence. It's been about 24 months now since we started with the treatment.
They decided to try it and it worked. It just killed them all off.
Mrs. McKenzie and her son now looking forward to celebrating her 100th birthday this fall.
Just like they were never there. It was just amazing, the recovery.
Well, some pretty interesting stories today on our string of top stories that we wanted to share with you. So thanks for hanging out on the stream today. If you're interested in the next big event for President Trump, we didn't have much of him today on the live stream, but he is hosting an event at the White House it's a pledge to the American worker. He'll be signing an executive order at the White House, and we'll take that live to our Facebook page. So you can check us out there at Fox 5 DC on our internet, all of our sort of platforms, feeds on social and on the web, and fox5dc.com as well. So thanks for hanging out. If you've been watching on our website or YouTube, you can catch me at my handle here on Twitter and Instagram, and we'll be back with more stuff, more news and live streams tomorrow at 11:30 on Friday, that is tomorrow. So again, today at 3 o'clock Eastern time, we'll have President Trump's event from the White House up on our Facebook page for sure to stream that live. With that, guys, have a great Thursday. Thanks for hanging out on this 19th of July, going into one more day before the weekend, and really just some gorgeous sunny skies here. Take a live look at the Capitol Dome here in DC. A couple of birds flying by. Looks like the colors really gorgeous there in the sky. Light blue, bunch of clouds, and we're looking forward to a gorgeous weekend here. But we have one more day of this, so we'll catch you again right here in the newsroom on our digital channel tomorrow, Fox 5 Live. We'll catch you then, guys. Thanks for watching.